Attorney Trixie, in your opinion, should vloggers be subjected to the same standards as traditional journalists?
Yikes. By standards, I assume that you mean the code of ethics of journalists. Since we're not journalists, I don't think so, because this would now be a burdensome restriction on free speech. Sometimes bloggers will just post, had breakfast. I mean, really, do you want to subject to certain standards what I had for breakfast?
Did you really eat the breakfast
Yeah.
that you posted? But yeah, that's
Do you
a
have
good question.
documents attesting to that? Were there any witnesses? So no, of course not. In the same way that what we want is more speech. The guarantee under the Constitution is that no law shall be passed abridging the freedom of speech. If you set standards, are those standards enforceable? So if they are, then that already constitutes a restriction, an abridgment of free speech. So no, definitely not. We want 1,000 flowers to bloom. We want more people writing, telling us their thoughts. We want more information to get out there. We want to encourage more people to speak up. I don't know if you know this. This is about autonomy. If you read all of the treaties now on free speech, the more recent ones, it explains why in a representative government like ours, kasi we vote for people to sit in office and they're there in representation of us. We do not get to write the laws. We let somebody else do that for us. But free speech is the expression of the autonomy of the voters. Kasi you don't have any more power. Once you voted that person in office, it is presumed that this person is acting on your behalf. But because they don't always act in our interest, free speech is the expression of the autonomy of these voters. We get to still be able to say, uy, binoto kita, pero hindi ko gusto yung ginagawa mo. So that's one of the reasons why the Constitution guarantees this.
What about having regulations when it comes to news? So I think this can be a ground where there can be some form of regulation as to the standards of what you state there. If we're saying fake news anyway is what we're trying to prevent, that would mean this relates to news. Kasi
Yes.
you're right, like when it comes to your own opinions as to your lifestyle,
Yes.
what you ate, or what you're gonna do for the weekend, then it wouldn't really have much impact on people or the public. But when it comes to saying what's happening in government,
Yes.
or when it relates to what we qualify as news, do you think that this can be subjected to certain standards by regulation, even when it's commentated on or mentioned by vloggers?
Yikes. Again, well, for journalists, for publications, there's Article 154 if it affects the national interest. I do not see why we should subject vloggers to the same. Well, of course, if it passes itself off as news, diba? If a person pretends he puts in all the bells and whistles of, let's say, a certain network, then yes, of course, they'll be liable. And the laws are already dealing with that. But beyond that, I think what we should be more encouraged to do is to share information, as well as journalists should be encouraged to be telling vloggers, well, okay, you can do this. On the other hand, you can do this. This is an old debate, actually. This debate is between tabloids and broadsheets. And they were doing this in the 1920s.
So back then,
Yes.
there was already a distinction between tabloids and
Yes.
typical, like the newspapers, and meron ding distinction as to how much regulation should be made between those two types of publication.
And in fact, traditionally, very little regulation has been made. So it's really up to the reader to decide that. And therefore, the response of government ought to still be education. Inform the people. I think that one of the reasons many of our government officials are so frustrated is because they're losing the communications game. It means their own comms people must step up. So teach vloggers, instead of getting angry at them, indicate the difference between journalism and vlogging, and then indicate that if you are a vlogger with a far-reaching, with a reach of going into the millions, then you should also understand that there will be people who will misunderstand, misinterpret, and so on. And it now becomes, something that vloggers can be made aware of.